Okay, this is block 7, The Greatest Generation, part 2, Rise of the Dictators, with the section starting with Josef Stalin. Here's one nasty son of a bitch right here. He was born in Georgia, not the state Georgia, the country Georgia. He changed his name to Stalin, or Stalin, which means man of steel. I guess if he was English, he would be Joseph Steelman. He's the man of steel. In communist Russia, after its founder, Vladimir Lenin, died, there was this nasty scramble for power. And coming out on top of this scramble for power was this guy, Josef Stalin. And he achieved power by pretty much first working with and then eliminating everybody who potentially stood in his way. By 1928, he had total control of the Soviet Union and set about creating the world's first totalitarian state. Totalitarian is a word that we really want to put on very, very few countries in history. A totalitarian state controls in totality everything within it. That there is not even the freedom to speak, to your neighbor the way you wish to speak to your neighbor. And Stalin goes about setting this up by the means of his secret police and his vast system of concentration camps known as the Gulag. He takes this total control. And he decides that what the Soviet Union needs... Now remember, the Soviet Union was born in Russia. Russia is a poor, economically backward, largely rural place. Stalin says for the Soviet Union to compete on the world stage, it has to be an industrial power like Germany, like Britain, like the United States. So he orders his people to go on this crash course of industrialization. And he calls it the 5-year plan. In 5 years, the Soviet Union will produce this much steel, this much iron, this much coal, this many railroad cars, this many locomotives, and lots of tractors. In a largely rural population, Stalin said, we're going to give tractors to every single person tilling the soil. Nobody was going to be allowed to own their own farms. Everybody's going to be working on these giant state-run cooperative farms where you're going to grow this much wheat, this much corn, this many cows, this many eggs, those many chickens. And everyone has to produce exactly what the plan says they're going to produce. And if you don't, you're obviously an enemy of the plan. And if you're an enemy of the plan, you're an enemy of the state. And if you're an enemy of the state, you go to Gulag, if you're lucky. He achieved that industrialization at an awful, terrible, terrible human cost. The man's a paranoid sociopath. He crushes all dissent. He crushes all national movements inside his territory. He takes all of the communist leaders that helped him get to power, executes all of them. He takes all the leadership of the Soviet military, executes all of them. Millions of people were sent to labor camps in Siberia. I have a good picture here. All of these red dots are Stalin's concentration or labor camps. They fill the Soviet Union literally from border to border. This is known as the Gulag. It's a Russian acronym. They are labor camps. And if you know anything about the geography of Russia, it is cold. And you are not sent really with lots of warm clothing. And you might be sentenced to 10, 15, 20 years of hard labor in Siberia for crimes against the revolution, for crimes against the state, for crimes against Stalin himself. Millions of ordinary Russians who did nothing wrong but failed to produce enough grain, make a joke that was considered to be inappropriate, them and their families, and anyone they had come in contact with in the last month, was sent out to these labor camps in Siberia. As bad as that was, what Stalin did to the Ukrainians was even worse. In the Ukraine, which is this part of the Soviet Union over here, Stalin decided to collectivize the farms, that the individual Ukrainian peasants were no longer going to have the ability to own their own land, so the farms were nationalized. And all of the peasants were put onto these giant cooperative farms and told to produce. And they had a difficult time producing, and a lot of them did not want to produce. They did not want to be ruled by Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union. So Stalin set about on a course of forced starvation, starvation as policy, that the agents of the Soviet government, the agents of the Soviet secret police, swept through the Ukraine, taking all the food, saying it was needed for the workers in Moscow and the workers in Leningrad and for the true revolutionaries in the rest of Russia, and all the food was taken. And not only was all the food taken, but all of the seed for next year's food was taken also. In the early 1930s, about 4 to 4.5 million Ukrainian peasants are forcibly starved to death by Stalin's government. And I can assure you that that put the rest of the Ukrainians in line. What makes it even a little nastier from our point of view is that many American progressives willfully chose to ignore these things when reporting on Stalin's Soviet Union. Walter Duranty is the most famous of them. He was an American progressive. He was a writer for the New York Times. And the New York Times sent him many times to the Soviet Union to report on what was going on there. And Duranty, all Walter Duranty wrote back was the wonderful new heaven on earth that Stalin was creating. And he ignored the crimes that he certainly had the ability to know about. Stalin bases his theory on Marxism-Leninism, which is kind of an addition to traditional Marxist theory. Basically, Marxist theory holds that, and this is why he claims the need to have this sort of power. Marxist theory holds that one day the workers of the world will unite and throw off the chains of the capitalists and inaugurate this wonderful socialist communist utopia. Marx in the 1840s predicts that this will come to pass in his lifetime. Well, when it did not come to pass in his lifetime, a lot of people started looking around and saying, how come it didn't pass in his lifetime? And Leninism was added to Marxism. Leninism says that capitalism has lots of kind of tricks up its sleeve, including imperialism overseas. And the other thing that Lenin adds to it is he says that the workers by themselves cannot possibly overthrow capitalism by themselves. What the workers need is leadership. The workers need a group of elite, expert revolutionaries. Revolutionary leaders like Lenin himself who will lead the workers towards this glorious goal of paradise. That's why Stalin, theoretically, in his own mind, assumes this power. That the people need leadership, they cannot do this on their own, they need him to show them the way, and if they refused to be shown the way, they would be forced into seeing the way. So that is Joseph Stalin and his Soviet Union.